and then for 6 years in software development in the Bay Area in Santa
Okay.
Clara. And I've been on my own since then.
Okay. Very similar. I went through Saint-Cyr in France.
Okay. It's a good place,
Uh,
right?
yeah, it's a decent place. If I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't.
Okay.
Uh, but no bad memories aside from the fact that graduating second out of my promotion, the fifth, number five, who was a son of general, took my spot.
Yeah.
So that should have, and that was in 1991. So it wasn't in 1960 or in 1970, right? So what people would still consider today at a time where things like that shouldn't happen, but it still did happen. It left a very bad taste in my mouth, and I decided to leave, and I went to the US and never regretted it.
Right.
So I spent 25 years in the US, and then I came back to France in 2018. Yeah, so I came back primarily for personal reasons because my parents are 85 years old now, not very autonomous anymore. And because I didn't want to retire, I wanted to remain active.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I
This is smart.
decided, yeah, I decided to invest myself into a rural area that is radically corrupt.
Who doesn't fall in love with, I've been at Sarlat. Who doesn't fall in love with Sarlat in the summer?
Look, my wife fell in love with it first and foremost. I'm from Alsace, right? And we are actually in Alsace right now. I'm in Haguenau right now.
Mm-hmm.
But winters were too cold for her here, even though global warming and we don't even see frost anymore. I mean, these days. And we ended up in Sarlat. Things went extremely well in the first 2, 3 years. It went so well that what happened to me actually did happen.
Right.
uh, uh, Made a lot of silent enemies, primarily an old bitter mayor and
Mm-hmm.
his cohort that claimed to be my friend, but in the background was doing everything he possibly could to sabotage what we built. And fast forward now a few years, we're in a situation where on the 20th of November, in 3 weeks, we will actually have unequivocal proof that I was wrongfully indicted, number one.
Right.
And number two, we also have proof that everything that was done to me was premeditated to depossess myself personally and the companies that I had built of everything that we had built and
Yeah.
seize it for political gain and political advantage. So, case in point, we had operated on two separate fields. I'll give you the background story, and you probably have read
Right.
some of it. When I first came to Sarlat in 2018, I already knew I wanted to start an incubator, technology incubator in a rural space. That's always something that I wanted to do, having lived for too long in Los Angeles and in a big city,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm fascinated by the incubation space, but I didn't want to do it in a big city where I have to fight traffic every morning and drive home at night, etc. I wanted to do it somewhere where the impact would be more measurable, while at the same time affording me a lifestyle that I can agree with because I grew up in a small town here in northeastern France. So in that sense, Salah was perfect, right? So we come in, and my first question, I'm now talking around May 2018, I was staying in an Airbnb with a Frenchman, Laurent
Mm-hmm.
Garrigou, a friend of mine. Uh, and I asked him, hey, I want to set up this incubator. Do you recommend or do you know of a good accountant? And he goes in his southern slang, oui, j'en connais deux, le mien que je ne recommande pas. If we're recording it, I'm going to translate it at the same time. I know two of them.
Yes.
Mine that I wouldn't recommend,
Mm-hmm.
and another one who is the president of the rugby team who people seem to like. So I said, okay, can you set me up with the president of the rugby team? He said, no problem. I have his number. Calls him up. I have an appointment the next day, small town.
Right.
So I go in and I see the president of the rugby team, who is also expert comptable, a CPA, and we hit it off right away. Still friends today. And he says, I'll take you on as a client. I like your project under one condition. I'm like, okay, what's the condition? He goes, you become a sponsor of the rugby team. I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like? And he hands me a leaflet, pick one. And I'm looking quickly through it. I mean, it was small potatoes, right? So it's okay, yeah, B. Okay, option B. Right in the middle. It was an A, B, C, like a menu, off the menu. I said, okay, great. So we started working together. He slowly introduced me to rugby, which I had been following remotely over the years. I've been following the national team. I never played rugby in my life, but it grew on me. And what grew on me more so was the ability of helping out the local club evolve because they were struggling both financially. They had no vision and no distribution whatsoever, no social media presence, nothing. So I said, okay, this is what I do for a living. This is what we know with my team how to do. We can contribute that and help the club grow. Great. We meet the volunteers, we meet the board. Again, small town, 8,000 people, skewed on the demographic side, very old, 80 plus on average, I would say.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? So I have to explain to them why they should have a new logo, for example. We presented them with 10 different versions. We let them pick and choose which one of the 10 they would like. It was done in a very democratic way. We made a lot of friends that way. Then COVID hit, as we all know.
Right.
So during COVID, I get a call from my accountant who says, we have a big problem. The club may not survive as a result of COVID. I'm like, okay, that's sad. What does the situation look like? And he gives me a number. He said, look, I'm not asking you to invest, but if you can help us, that would be great. I said, well, you're not looking for a donation anymore. I have to think this over because the number was pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
He said, let me think it over. Nothing is going on right now. I can't even go outside. We're not even allowed to walk down the street anymore because of COVID. I have plenty of time. So I called him back a few days later. I said, look, I'm willing to help you out. However, if I do it, I don't want to have a status quo. I want us to build something that moves forward. I don't like to be stagnant. I don't want to stay at this level of play. I don't like anything that's amateur or amateurish. So what I would like to do is, as we discussed, redo the branding of the club and really build something that we can all be proud of as a contribution to the community. By way of doing that, indirectly, we saved the club from financial ruin, knowing that this club had been created in 1903. And just looking at the history and being around people in their 80s, some of them 90s, that were there 70 years ago and playing for the club, I was looking at my wife and said, we can't let this go fall by the wayside and die. I mean, these guys are going to die with it if we do that. So it was, I mean, it really was like that. I mean, it was like almost like a humanitarian effort to a certain extent at first. So long story short, we saved the club financially. We start building it up. We start recruiting better players. The first season, we win 18 out of 22 games. The follow-up season, full season, after COVID, we win 22 out of 22. First time in 109 years history of the club. And we move up. Now, backtrack a little bit. When we first started this effort, there were some, as we call them in French, balbutiements of dissenting voices, very few in the background. All
voices.
Yeah.
Okay.
All expressing themselves the same way via avatars on social media. Fake profiles, making funny derogatory comments. I mean, childish stuff. Right? So we ignored them. At one point in time, we decided that everybody who is not man enough or woman enough to voice their opinion with a real profile, we're just going to delete it. And we warned them ahead of time. but it didn't stop anything. They would create new ones. I mean, a child's game. But there was this background noise, minority background noise that became prevalent because it became louder and louder of saying, these guys don't know what they're doing, they're taking over our club, etc., etc. At one point in time, during 2021, after we had won virtually every single game, one of the old members of the committee that I'm still very good friends with invited me for coffee. I need to talk to you. Okay, so that we're now going around, I would say May or June of 2021. I have coffee with him and he goes, look, even though you've been here for 3 years, Dom, you're still considered a newcomer. Be very, very careful who you associate with. Because the rumor, that's a key word, the rumor is running around that you will have a visit from the gendarmes. So I'm like, okay, well, let them come. I got nothing to hide, right?
Mm-hmm.
6 months later, September 7th, 2022, I have 50, almost like SWAT team style, 50 gendarme, police, whatever you want to call them, coming down at my house, at my office, literally storming it. So anyway, so I'm to a certain degree surprised, if not very surprised, but then I see a guy walking in with a warrant, and I said, come in. And I tell him, I expected you. And he looks at me and goes, and with a smile, like a derogatory smile. That's the best way I could describe it. Oh, really? Really? What makes you say so? I said, well, people have been warning me for the last 6 months that you would show up. But I didn't expect you to show up armed and dangerous like this. I was expecting a more gentle knock on the door. So they come in with a search warrant into my home, and at the same time I had my office. Now, bear in mind, I had created 60 jobs in a small town that desperately needed those jobs,
Right.
with a sky-high unemployment rate, especially post-COVID. And when I say I created jobs, it was inside my incubator, right? So I built two things. As a humanitarian, I decided to take over the rugby club. As a business person, I decided to build out the technology incubator called Unicorn, which is a play on word on my last name, Einhorn in German, which means unicorn in German. Right. So 60 jobs, but I couldn't find the talent locally. It didn't exist. So what did I do? I recruited from the outside. I recruited people from Serbia, Nigeria, Ghana, Canada, US, England, from all over the world. Out of the 60 people, we had 27 different nationalities. But it created a backlash like you wouldn't believe in that small town. The rumors were swirling around, oh, what's this black guy doing walking into Dom's office? It must be an illegal.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking retarded comments. I mean, unbelievable. That black guy happened. That black guy happened to be my most skilled engineer, right? And I didn't even know how to break it to him, because at one point in time he got wind of it as well. Said like, his name is Junior. Just don't worry about anything, right? I mean, you're in a small town here. You know, this is the minority, not the majority. Don't worry about anything. But he also started getting concerned, right? People think he's walking into the office because he had a key to work after hours. People think he's breaking into the office.
Yeah.
So it got really, really bad. So what happened is that this minority became more and more vocal and went to the mayor, to the local political elects, etc., and started putting more and more pressure on this fact that now there's all of these newcomers in town working at this place that nobody understood. What's a technology incubator doing in an agricultural commune in France, was one thing. And what is this crazy American, even though I was born in France, doing, taking over our rugby club, right? So I didn't respect the separation between church and state, because rugby in the southwest of France is clearly a religion, which was foreign to me, right? I was already in the project I had already assumed the project prior to actually becoming deeply aware that I had crossed a psychological line between church and state by agreeing to become the president of the rugby club. I wasn't even candidate. The old bénévoles, the volunteers,
Mm-hmm.
nominated me as the president, and I reluctantly accepted during COVID because there was no other candidate, right? So it was almost like forced onto me. I said, okay, if there's no other candidate, I'll accept it. I'll take it over. So that happened on February 7th, 2022. So search warrant, 50 cops, 25 at my house, 25 at my office, storming both my house and both my office. I have no idea what's going on. Then I'm being heard for 48 hours. In France, it's called a garde à vue. And I'm sitting in front of this gendarme who's asking me the dumbest questions I've ever been asked in my life. Like, okay, you have 7 companies. Why would anybody create 7 companies unless they intend to defraud the French Revenue Service? I'm like, where are we here? I mean, is Stalin interrogating me? Is it Kim Jong-un? Or do you have any sense of what you're asking me and what you're actually saying? Are you saying that anybody who creates a company in France is a criminal that doesn't want to pay taxes? I mean, that's how the conversation went, right?
Yeah. Well, you're French, so you're aware that they actually have social classes in France.
Oh, the castes.
But there seem to be within the class is proof of guilt that's important, but between the class is actually proof of innocence.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, the class, obviously, I grew up lower middle class. My
Hmm.
uh, my 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 father was a fonctionnaire, a government employee that worked for the French railway system, the SNCF, as a
Yeah.
security agent for his entire career. That also came up. Like, I must have done something illegal to break the curse, the middle class curse of actually, making it beyond that. So there was a complete incomprehension, a lack of understanding as to how my industry works, the technology industry, let
Hmm.
alone how an incubator works, but how a person coming from a lower middle class background, born and raised in northeastern France, actually can actually make it beyond that, like to an extreme, like almost like you've been marked like a cow, right? You've been marked with this stamp, and you're never going to get rid of this stamp on your butt. You're going
Right.
to carry it for the rest of your life. Later on, much later on, I find out that the lead investigator who's asking me these questions is the husband to the mayor's right-hand woman, première adjointe au maire.
Okay.
Much like 3 years later. I mean, there's all of these strange coincidences that pass on. But before we tackle that, so I'm being heard for 48 hours.
Hmm.
It's in February of 2022. At night, I'm being thrown into a freezing cold jail cell. They turn off the heater. It was -6 degrees Celsius outside.
Yeah.
I come out the next morning. The first question this nice gentleman asks me is, "How was your night? Are you satisfied with your bedding?" I mean, absurd stuff. And I'm starting to get angrier and angrier. And he still hasn't asked me a single question. He still hasn't given me any indication whatsoever as to why I am in this Kafka-like situation. None whatsoever. I'm still asking, what is going on? And I repeatedly ask him, why am I here? What am I doing here? What are you reproaching to me? What is going on? He refuses to answer me, and he keeps telling me, we're going to get to the heart of the matter very soon. But the heart of the matter never happens. At the same time, I'm being inflicted judicial control, contrôle judiciaire.
Yeah.
Now get this. I'm not allowed to leave the country, number one. Number
Yeah.
two, they seized my French and my US passport, the US passport being the property of the US government only.
Right. And you had the French one because you're born in France.
Correct. My two passports. They seize US property, which they have no right to do.
No, they don't.
The local gendarmerie, all my electronic devices, my phones, etc., etc. I'm not allowed to talk to my CPA. I'm not allowed to talk to any of my current or previous financial directors. I'm not allowed to talk to any of my employees. I'm not allowed to talk to any of the rugby players from the local team. In the first 24 hours, I was not allowed to talk to my own wife. There was a mistake on their end that they caught afterwards, where they actually corrected it. And the list goes on and on and on. And they seize every single thing that I own in France. All my financial assets are frozen. They still are to this day. We'll get to that in a little bit,
Yeah.
and why I decided to go on a hunger strike. So they seize everything, and I'm being indicted. So imagine this. It could never happen in a place like the US. It could never happen in what I call a democratic country. Now, we all obviously, again, with almost 3 years of hindsight, we know exactly why, how this all happened, and it's pure collusion, corruption between all of these players. And we have hard proof on it all, and we will demonstrate it through the judicial system, no matter how long it takes. And I don't think it will take much longer. In fact, the investigating judge that was on my case, we had filed for her to be removed from the case for cause, notably for fraud. Our filing was rejected, and strangely enough, she disappeared off my case. She's no longer around. Nobody has seen of her. Nobody has heard of her. So she was dealt with somewhere in the background, right? Internally. So February 9th, 2022, I'm officially indicted. Now, during my hearing with the police, the gendarme, I have next to me my business attorney, because he was the closest, and I had never been in a situation like this in my life before. And at one point in time, because he's not allowed to talk to me during that hearing, he's handing me a little post-it piece of paper that says, "This will be your criminal attorney," with a name on paper. I'm like, okay. I hand it back to him. I'd never heard of this person. I immediately go to Paris as I'm being released. No bail, right? But I go in front of a judge on February 9th, 2022. I've never met this judge, the one I just mentioned, the woman that was removed from my case. Never met her in my life. I was supposed to be presented in front of her at 3 p.m. and I'm being presented to her at 7 p.m. And for 4 hours, I'm sitting in the courthouse in handcuffs so that everybody could see me, including the press that goes in and out, etc., etc. We today have proof, for example, that before I was indicted, while I was still being heard by the police, all of the journalists already had a press release from the district attorney about my indictment. Before the decision to indict me was even made, the press already had an official press release from the district attorney about my indictment, stating that I was being indicted for tax fraud, which is a complete lie, completely made up. So, I mean, this, again, easiest way to explain it is a Kafka-like situation where I'm like, what is going on? In fact, about 4 or 5 years into the indictment, I look at my wife. I said, "Honey, I must have done something that's legal in the US and illegal in France, but I have no idea what it is." So in France, as you know, when you're being indicted, the very first thing is you get your documents stating why you're being indicted.
Yeah.
So my attorney, my brand new criminal attorney, says, "Well, you're going to get probably your docs tomorrow, and then you come to my office." Well, tomorrow, February 10th, 2022 came about, nothing. February 11th came about, nothing. So he contacts the Parquet de Bergerac, the courthouse, asking for the docs. Nothing. A week later, nothing. 2 weeks later, nothing. A month later, nothing. He keeps sending him official notices. We still get nothing. 46 days later, the docs finally arrive to my attorney. He calls me, goes, Mr. Einhorn, you should come up to Paris because we've got about 2 pages of documents and there's nothing in your case other than printouts and translations of your emails. And in many cases, they're translating it the opposite of what it actually says. So I go to Paris and I spend the whole day going through all this, and it's basically just my emails, like regular emails that you would send back and forth about deal flow, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, he was right. In many cases, the reason, first of all, why it was so voluminous is because they had translated it, probably using bad AI. And in many cases, it was translated with the opposite meaning of what it actually said. I'm like, this is really, really bizarre. So I asked them, what is it that they're actually reproaching me? He said, well, here's a list. There's 3 pages. They're reproaching you, for example, of bringing in illegal aliens into the country, like the black kid I was talking about, who was actually French, right? But since he was black, he was probably, who knows from where. That's what the rumor was. There was no tax fraud in there. URSAF, which we had never. URSAF is the French social charges office that takes care of retirement and whatnot. We had never received a single letter from URSAF. Right? Today we know it was completely made up, et cetera, et cetera. He said, well, typically when they have nothing against you, they just throw everything against the wall, right? To make it seem like there is a lot of stuff. And in your case, there is nothing. And that's why you have 3 pages. Now, if I didn't have, let's make this clear. If I were the dual national of the US and France, I would not be sitting here today. Because they took everything from me and they made it impossible for me as a French citizen to defend myself. They even seized my wife's accounts, which has absolutely nothing to do with the procedure. And almost 3 years later, even though back in April of this year, the courts have said that all the money needs to be, there needs to be restitution for all the funds seized, we still haven't received a red penny. And the appeals court 7 months ago ordered the restitution of all the funds that were seized. And we're here 7 months later without a red penny. We have to systematically sue every branch of the French government to right the wrong that was done.
Sounds like lawfare.
It's absolutely been insane. And what saved me was my dual citizenship and the fact that I kept assets in the United States, without which I could have never hired an attorney, without which I could have never mounted any defense. And they didn't know that. So here comes the most absurd thing. When we finally get 46 days after my indictment, our official docs from the state, the first line, I'm going to say it in French first and I'm going to translate it, says, Monsieur Einhorn a été mis en examen sur des rumeurs qui circulent dans le Sarlat. Mr. Einhorn was indicted based on rumors that are circulating in the city of Sarlat. That was the first line of my docs. In France, to indict a person, you need what's called élément grave et concordant. You need highly damaging proof of wrongdoing, translated literally. The third page in French says, les perquisitions menées au domicile de M. Einhorn ainsi qu'à ses bureaux n'ont rien révélé. The search warrant served at Mr. Einhorn's house and offices did not reveal anything. Yet they pushed forward with everything in full force. So my attorneys told me since February 2022, well, don't worry. There's nothing in your docs. You know, this is going to all clear out. What I told them from the very beginning was all of these warnings that I had received and the fact that everyone in that local community told me how corrupt that local government is and how connected they are, specifically the Freemasons. Through my case, I started getting blood pressure. I'm not sure if you read
Mhm.
that. So at one point in time, I had 210 over 130 blood pressure, sky high, and I started getting heart palpitations. I went to see my doctor, who sent me to the cardiologist, and I went to see two cardiologists, put me on a protocol. And 2 weeks later, my health card, called Vital in France, no longer works. I'm like, what's going on? So the doctor tells me, well, call the health office, the CPIM, which I did. I was on hold for 30 minutes, and a nice gentleman comes online and says, "Let me check see what's going on." He goes, "We were given information that proves that you're not a French citizen." I'm like, "Wow, wait, what? What does that mean? I was born in France. Both my parents are French. Who gave you this information? Where does this information come from?" And he hung up on me. Well, it turns out that the nice judge who was in charge of my case until recently, who now disappeared,
Mhm.
sent them a copy of only my US passport when she had both my US and my French passport and told them this person is an American, not a French citizen, putting my life in jeopardy, in danger, so that I wouldn't get the help that I need to solve my health problem.
That's malicious.
Absolutely malicious, yeah. The mayor of Sarlat officially said that he was considering me as a potential political opponent in the press.
Oh yeah. Okay. So
Officially
that should,
said, yeah.
sorry, Dom. That should be a condemnation by itself.
So we sued the I mean it goes way beyond. And he in the same line, once he said that people were telling him that I would be a political opponent, which I have no politics on my mind whatsoever. The last thing I would think about doing. He also says, but anyway, everything is going to come down on him anyway. That's the mayor who is actually saying that in the press. Now, he was sued for defamation. The final hearing will be on December 11th, and most likely condemnation, because we had to move the case to Paris. Everything that stays in the local court system is being ignored by the DA. There's no investigation going on. Everything we filed in the local, in Bergerac, in the court system, has been systematically ignored, like it wasn't filed, like it didn't even exist.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The unicorn incubator that I started, after I was indicted, the Comité de Commune, which is the agglomeration of the little towns around
Mhm.
Sarlat, seized everything that I had in there and just slapped a new label on there, Salatech, and called it their idea and their creation. And they're using everything, my entire investment, every single thing, down to the coffee machine, and promoting it on Facebook, on social media, etc., like they created it, like it's theirs. And they systematically stole everything from us. They did the exact same thing with the rugby team. But from anybody looking from the outside in, I mean, if you had told me what happened to me in 2017, the first thing I would have said is no, there's no way, it would never happen. But not only is it possible, what we found out through the process of going through this is that there are dozens of people, specifically entrepreneurs, creators, inventors, that were hurt exactly the same way by the same people for the last 30 years in the same town, many of which have actually committed suicide.
Yeah.
So as we went through this and I started getting the media involved, more and more of these victims contacted my attorneys saying what's happening to Dom is exactly what happened to me in 1980, in 1985, in 1994, in 2001, you name it. So there is one of them, for example, who's an inventor, I won't name his real name, who had a debt for $14,000, a government debt, URSAF, like social charges or something.
Mhm.
They shut him completely down. They seized 1.4 million euros in assets, and they completely bankrupted him using the same administrators and the same liquidators that were in my case. You see things in hindsight that you never realized because you go in with the best intentions, you think you're doing right, and while doing right, while doing the right thing, you're being sabotaged all along by people who claim to be your allies, and the only thing that they have in mind is to destroy you in the cheapest, in the pettiest way you could possibly imagine. So to touch upon, because I know you contacted me also, one of the reasons they contacted me was because of the hunger strike.
Yeah.
I got to a point about 50 days ago where I told my attorneys, we need to change the strategy. Everything, I agree with you, everything that you've done on the legal side, all the filings that you've done, I mean, I can't even count them anymore. Just legal fees alone, I spent 800,000 euros since this all started. And just pure legal fees, hard cash legal fees. I said, we need a media strategy, right? And I've had enough. I've come to the end where I'm not willing to wait any longer, knowing what's really going on. And we need to get into the news. We need to point the finger as to what's really going on here, especially considering the support, the groundswell that we have from all these other victims.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the French people is not outraged with that story of yours.
So they are absolutely outraged. However, there has been a significant lack of courage where nobody wants to be the first one until I had a sports station that for the first time ever let me speak freely. I think I shared that with you. If not, maybe I have not because I didn't know you were a Frenchman. So
Hmm.
it's in French. So I spoke freely for about 45 minutes, and that's really what made things explode. It was a calculated risk that got me the hearing, express hearing in the Cour de Cassation, the higher court in France, that I hoped to get. And that hearing I received 2 weeks ago on October 16th. They're deliberating. They're going to give their final verdict on November 20th in 3 weeks. But the interesting thing is that the rapporteur de la Cour, the court recorder,
Hmm.
stated independently that my case needed to be dismissed. And so did the Attorney General, the DA in Paris, stating also, citing with my attorneys that this case needs to be dismissed. And now there's a deliberation until November 20th. I'm here, 3 years in almost right now, with a hard court order in my hand, ordering restitution of funds and no money, not a red penny. That's also what led me to start a hunger strike 50 days ago. So it's the systematic injustice that led me to an extreme route that I would have never considered 3 years ago when this started unraveling, when this started happening to me.
Has the fund been spent or earmarked?
We don't even know. So in France, when the funds get that becomes very tricky and very legalese, right? Which I wasn't a lawyer, I'm still not today, but it might as well be. So when the funds get seized in France, they go into a segregated account that is managed by an organization called l'AGRASC, l'Agence de recouvrement, where terrorist money typically gets in. Well, until a few years ago, that was a standalone entity that was independent of any all, as the Constitution states, when money is being seized, needs to be seized by an entity that has no correlation whatsoever to any other government organizations. Today, that agency is part of the budget ministry. Get this. So they're supposed to hold money pending the outcome of the case, right? Hold it.
Hmm.
In my case, restitution was ordered, but more than likely was already spent because it's not part of the budget ministry. Look, I know this is going to be over, whether it's tomorrow or 6 months from now, and I will never look back. I'm not the type to look back to delve on it. Now, I want to right a wrong, and I also am on a crusade to seek justice, primarily because I'm not the only one that's been damaged, right? And which I didn't know before. So there's a crusade, and there is a huge groundswell of people that want to be part of this movement against this corrupt system that's in place. Hopefully, in an isolated part of France.
I'd like to move on to the positive side of Dawn.
So do I. So do I.
People relate to you and they see you're being mistreated, but there's much, much more to you from what I read. For instance, you have these games, and the games right now are dominated by shooting games, and nobody's studying what they do to the brain. But you have games of actually puzzles and quizzes, and actually
Yeah.
that's a very important part of games.